I'm spending a little time in the high tunnel out at our neighbor's yard this morning in the mode of collecting seed. It looks pretty feral and wild in here, and that's true. To some extent, it's a little bit by design. We do have a lot of elements that are growing nicely. The ginger seems to finally be starting to take off. Made some time to trellis tomatoes, and so they're starting to form some fruits. It looks like things are going in the right direction in that way. But then we've had this holdover of lettuces and kales and other cool weather crops that were here in the late winter, early spring that we've left here with the intent of saving seed. And I wanted to share the extremely low complexity, easy entry method for saving seed from plants like this in this video. My preference when it's possible, and this is why I like to let it happen in high tunnels, is that you get a little bit more of a grace period. The seeds forming in here, if we were to get a really intense rain, these could all get rotted away before we have a chance to collect them. But right now there are, pardon my hand, I've got a lot of wounds on there. Just keep your eyes on the flowers and the seed. They are in puff mode. So this is lettuce, and it is a dandelion-ish, pretty close relative to dandelion, and all throughout here are these little white seeds. Each one of those would be a lettuce plant. And so what we do, which is very, very simple, I like to use a nice big metal bowl so it's very easy to collect into, and normally I have both my hands going, but I simply massage these, the ones that have the flowers and the puffs there, and we get all sorts of seed at the bottom. It's easy enough once we get through a bit of this to winnow it, which is just basically blowing a breeze across it outside. And I'll do that though once we're over a bed where I'd like to see them grow. Even easier are the brassicas. They tend to tumble out like little bowling balls. So there's all this chaff in here, and then underneath just a carpet of seeds that have been nice and dry in the high tunnel. But we'll let these dry before we put them in a plastic bag or anything. We'll certainly let them dry further. But really what I've been doing, I realize probably would be helpful to have somebody else filming this, but you can really just almost grab them and strip them off into your hand and dump them in a container. I'm snipping the stalks because really what I want to do is clear all this out. I want to make some room for other things to happen in here, to get some deep hydration and some midsummer crops happening. Probably get some cucumbers and things going. We've got all sorts of hot peppers and heat-loving plants that are doing really well, and the cool-loving plants, like the lettuces and the kales, are miserable and wrapping up. So get the seed and get them out. Here's a stalk, and just grinding it up, you can see all the seeds falling through, or you can hear them. And there's real value. Well, first of all, doing it over a bowl, because otherwise you're going to lose a lot. Recognizing that where they were, almost certainly this will be a place where kale and lettuce will come back. So we can design for that. We can either plant things into here in a really thoughtful transitioning way, or we can hydrate the heck out of it and see if they reemerge. It's probably a little early in the heat of the summer for them to start up again, but that's a very distinct possibility. But then also these stalks, I'm not going to get intense about getting every last seed out. I'm going to make a pile of them, and then we'll bring them out to a spot that needs a cover crop or is ready for something else to happen, and be able to set them in motion there. Here's a spot that's got some bare soil next to our neighbor's driveway. So this might not necessarily be a place that we're going to be planting food crops that we'll eat, but at least we can have them continue to grow. And so here's this leftover stalk. We got piles and piles of these around because we're going through and stripping the seeds off. And I can just agitate the soil just a little bit in here. We've had a lot of rains recently, so the soil is very hydrated. And I can lay this almost like a mulch, like a straw mulch or a hay mulch. I can snip it up a little if I want. But this is one of the methods that we use in the spirit of seed saving that allows us to get some seed for next year, but also sets in motion these crops in spontaneous but thoughtful ways throughout the landscape. A little bit of mulch and a little bit of potential for some mixed kale and mustards to come up as a ground cover next to this new pond to stabilize soil, build organic matter, and move this in the direction of being more garden-like. And there's room all the way down through here. Maybe there's kales and mustards that go on that back berm now that we have the overflow where we want it to be. And then in that lens, I can look over here and say, okay, There's nutsedge all throughout that maybe we want to start pulling. So maybe I'm going to have handfuls of lettuce tops that as I pull nutsedge and send them over into the chicken area, these blank spaces can be mulched with lettuce tops. So if I'm going to pull these weeds, if I'm going to erase them, I want to set it in some new direction. And so seed saving and the chaff left over is a really great opportunity. So I'll go through once I'm ready to do it. There's beans that are working here. There's a couple squash here, there, but a fair bit of nutsedge. It's a little bit tough. I'd like to replace that with cultivar lettuce as a waste product of processing seed. It was probably about a week to 10 days ago. I can see the stalk here. This was when I'd finished processing a early variety, a very cold appreciating variety of mustard that had bolted pretty early in the high tunnel. And I threw this stalk over here, we'll call it the plant marker, and threw it on this berm of soil, and here we are. So there's other weeds for sure, but there's all these mustards coming through. So I could do a couple things. I could either say, all right, well, I'm gonna take the time and curate. I'm gonna weed out the dock, I'm gonna weed out the smartweed and the nutsedge and the other dock. And I could do all that. I could also just let this grow and let it be ground cover. Could be a little bit more deliberate about how I put the seeds down, because here clearly there's a lot and then it's weedy again and blank over here. Or I can just say, well, let me grab, because we've had some rains, we've got loose soil. That's for the chickens, and this will be where the next batch goes, which I have right here. Mulch. So it's protecting the soil and it's adding the genetic potential. Once the seedlings start coming up in a good way and I know who they are, I can take that and send it to the chickens. Going back even further in time, this is where we were processing red Russian kale seed and doing that same technique of collecting in an informal way in the high tunnel, not trying to get every last seed, and then coming out here with the stalks, grinding and shaking them. And so in between the winter squash and some cabbages, brassica with brassica, it's a little silly, but whatever, there's all this red Russian kale, which came up as the result of throwing the waste, the leftovers of the seed saving process. So it's a really nice cover crop and maybe a really nice plant that we can transplant later on, or we can feed to the chickens, or we can start making some tender green salads from that. And it was just kind of tossing sticks in the area. Worked out pretty nicely, tends to work out pretty nicely, especially if you factor in the effort. If it fails miserably, well, you threw something on the ground and it didn't turn into plants. That's not the worst. That's happened before. I'm gonna get back to focusing on the work before it gets too hot in here. But just as some food for thought, saving seed is really not that big a deal. Having some way of marking what's going on. What I'll tend to do, since they'll be in these bowls for a bit, once I grind off the heads from here, we'll put this in the garage or somewhere where there's good airflow, but not in the sun and not where rain can get into it. And we'll pass some air over that. We'll let the bugs that are in there have a chance to leave at their leisure. And I like to just put a little thing, round leaf lettuce. I don't remember the variety name, but this will be a bowl full of that type of lettuce. Italian oak leaf will get its own bowl. Red Russian will. A mix of unknown mustardy brassicas, which is this whole crew in here. That'll be that. It'll just be mustards and kale. And we'll use the tops to set in motion more thoughtful directions outside where it's gotten a little bit weedy. So there's many yields, and then we'll transition the space. But that's enough of that for now. If you haven't tried saving seed before, clearly if someone like me who's super loose with all this stuff is able to get seeds, these are all plants grown from seed we saved. It's not that big a deal. By all means, look up much better quality information around thorough winnowing, around drying and curing. There's tons of information out there. Consider this an entry level video, giving you or sharing permission for us all to just collect seed from plants that want to make them anyway, and some thoughts about where to send the chaff so that you get additional beautiful yields. Thanks for watching.
toilet paper.